The music stopped. The doors did not open. Elena Marsh stood at the front of the chapel with her hands trembling around a bouquet of white roses, and for the first time in her life, she understood what it meant for a room to hold its breath. 200 guests sat behind her in silence, waiting for a groom who was not coming. The priest shifted his weight from one foot to the other. The organist's fingers hovered over the keys, unsure whether to play the song again, or simply stop pretending this was still a wedding. Elena did not turn around. She could not make herself do it. If she turned, she would see every face in that room staring back at her, and she was not ready for that yet. She kept her eyes fixed on the tall wooden doors at the end of the aisle, willing them to open, willing Daniel to walk through them with some ordinary explanation. A flat tire, a wrong turn, anything that would let this moment make sense. The doors stayed closed. Her phone buzzed once in the small clutch bag tied to her wrist. She had almost forgotten she was even carrying it. With shaking fingers, she opened the bag and pulled it out, careful to keep it low, hidden from the eyes of the crowd. The screen lit up with a message from Daniel. "I can't do this. I'm sorry. I'm not the man you think I am." Nothing else. No name signed at the bottom, no apology that meant anything. Just 11 words that ended 5 years of her life in the space of a single breath. Elena read the message 3 times, as if reading it again might change the words on the screen. It did not. The letters stayed exactly where they were, cold and final, glowing up at her from the small rectangle of glass in her palm. Somewhere behind her, a woman whispered something to the man beside her. The whisper was quiet, but in a room this silent, it might as well have been shouted. Elena felt her face grow hot. She felt the eyes on her back multiply, felt them crawl across her shoulders like something alive. She was Elena Marsh, 29 years old, a woman who had built her entire adult life around careful plans and quiet promises. She did not like surprises. She did not like being watched, and now she was standing in the most watched moment of her life, holding a bouquet that suddenly felt as heavy as a stone, while the man she had planned to spend forever with had vanished like smoke. The priest cleared his throat gently. "Miss Marsh," he said, his voice pitched low enough that only she in the front row could hear it. "Would you like a moment?" A moment would not fix this. A moment would not bring Daniel back through those doors. A moment would only give the crowd more time to watch her fall apart in front of them, one held breath at a time. She was about to answer, to say something, anything, just to break the silence pressing down on her chest, when the heavy wooden doors at the back of the chapel opened. For one wild, foolish second, hope surged through her. Daniel. He had come after all. There was an explanation, there was a reason. But the man who stepped through the doorway was not Daniel. He was taller, for one thing, taller than any man Elena had ever seen walk into a room and somehow make the room feel smaller around him. He wore a black suit that fit him with the kind of precision that spoke of money and care, though there was nothing soft about the way he moved in it. His dark hair was cut short and neat, and even from the far end of the aisle, Elena could see that his eyes were a pale, striking shade of gray, almost silver, the kind of eyes that seemed to take in everything at once and miss nothing. She did not know him. She was certain of that. A face like his, a presence like his, was not something a person forgot. The guests turned in their seats, murmuring louder now, no longer bothering to whisper. Elena watched the stranger walk down the aisle, with slow, unhurried steps, his gaze fixed on her and nothing else, as if the 200 guests around them did not exist at all. "Excuse me," Elena said, finding her voice at last, though it came out smaller than she wanted. "This is a private event." The man stopped a few feet from her. Up close, he was even more striking, with a jaw carved from something hard and unyielding, and a stillness about him that made the frantic energy of the room seem to quiet just by being near him. When he spoke, his voice was deep and calm, carrying easily to every corner of the silent chapel. "My name is Cale Draven," he said. "I am aware this is not the wedding you expected to have today." Elena blinked. "I'm sorry. Do we know each other?" "No," Cale said simply, "but I know what has happened here, and I did not want you to stand alone in front of a room of people who have nothing to offer you but pity." A ripple of confused whispers moved through the guests. Elena's mother, seated in the front row in a pale blue dress, half rose from her seat before Elena's aunt gently pulled her back down. Elena felt her heart pounding so hard, She was sure everyone in the chapel could hear it. "I don't understand what's happening right now," she said, her voice tight. "My fiancé just left me at the altar in front of everyone I know, and now a stranger is walking down the aisle, like this is somehow his moment too. I would like everyone to leave, please." "I understand this is not the time or place," Cale said, and for a moment, something flickered behind his pale eyes, something that looked almost like sympathy, though it was gone before Elena could be certain. "But I am asking you to trust me for the length of one sentence, and then I will let you decide what happens next." Elena's jaw tightened. She wanted to scream. She wanted to run. She wanted, more than anything, to be anywhere else in the world but standing in this dress, in this chapel, in front of these people, with a stranger asking her to trust him after the worst betrayal of her life. But something in his voice, some strange steadiness, made her pause. "Fine," she said. "One sentence." Cale Draven lowered himself to one knee in front of her, right there on the chapel steps, in front of 200 stunned guests, and a priest who had gone completely still. The gasp that moved through the room was audible this time, a collective intake of breath that seemed to suck all the air out of the space. "Marry me instead," Cale said, looking up at her with those pale gray eyes, steady and unblinking. "Today, right now, in this church, in this dress, with these guests, say yes, and I promise you will never again have to wonder if someone will show up for you." For a long moment, Elena could not speak. The room around her seemed to tilt slightly, the way it does in the seconds after a shock, when the mind has not yet caught up with what the eyes have seen. She looked down at this stranger kneeling in front of her, at his calm, certain expression, and she felt a strange mixture of anger and disbelief rise up inside her chest. "Is this a joke?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because if it is, I promise you, this is not the day for it." "It is not a joke," Cale said. "I understand how this looks. I understand you have no reason to trust a word I say. But I am asking you to consider that the life you were about to walk into a moment ago was never the one you deserved, and that perhaps, in the strangest possible way, something better has just walked through those doors." Behind Elena, someone in the crowd let out a nervous laugh, quickly stifled. Her mother had both hands pressed over her mouth. Her best friend, standing just behind her as maid of honor, had gone pale and silent, clutching her own bouquet so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Elena felt the eyes of the entire room on her, waiting, watching, hungry for whatever would happen next. A few hours ago, she had been the woman everyone envied, the bride in the perfect dress, about to marry the man she loved. Now she was the woman everyone pitied, standing at an altar with a stranger kneeling before her, offering something so absurd it could not possibly be real. And yet, there was something about the way Cale looked at her, not with pity, not with the awkward, uncomfortable sympathy she had seen on the faces of the guests behind her. He looked at her, the way a person looks at something they have already decided is worth protecting. "Get up," Elena said quietly. Cale rose to his feet in one smooth motion, towering over her again, patient and unhurried. "I don't know you," Elena continued, her voice steadier now, though her hands still trembled around the ruined bouquet. "I don't know why you're here, or how you knew what happened, or why you would say something like that to a woman you've never met. But I am not going to stand here and pretend that any of this makes sense to me." "It doesn't have to make sense today," Cale said. "It only has to be true." Elena stared at him, searching his face for some sign of mockery, some hint that this was an elaborate prank, orchestrated by someone cruel enough to make her humiliation complete. She found nothing but calm, steady certainty. "I need air," she said finally, and before anyone could stop her, before her mother could rise from her seat, or her best friend could reach for her arm, Elena turned and walked quickly down the side aisle, pushing through a small door that led out into a quiet garden behind the chapel. The cool afternoon air hit her face like a slap, and for the first time since the doors had failed to open, Elena allowed herself to breathe. She walked several steps into the garden, past a stone fountain and a row of white folding chairs left over from an earlier event, until she reached a low wall at the far edge of the property. She set the bouquet down on the wall, sat beside it, and finally let the tears come. They came quietly at first, then in shaking, silent waves that made her shoulders tremble. 5 years. 5 years of her life, of birthdays and holidays and quiet mornings, of picking out this dress, and tasting cake samples, and choosing songs for a first dance that would now never happen. All of it gone, in the time it took to read 11 words on a phone screen. She did not hear footsteps behind her until a voice spoke softly, a respectful distance away. "I am not here to pressure you," Cale said. "I only wanted to make sure you were not alone out here." Elena wiped her eyes quickly, embarrassed to be caught crying by a man she had known for less than 10 minutes. "I told you I needed air." "You did," he agreed, "and I gave you as much of it as I could before I came to check on you. I can leave, if that is what you want." Elena looked up at him, standing several feet away, with his hands loosely at his sides, making no move to come closer without her invitation. There was something in his patience that unsettled her more than his sudden proposal had. Strangers did not act like this. Strangers did not read a room, and a person's grief, with this kind of care. "Who are you really?" she asked. "And don't tell me your name again. I want to know why a man I've never met would walk into my wedding and do what you just did." Cale was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "My family has business history with yours," he said finally. "I recognized your name on the invitation list for this event, though I was not on the guest list myself. I came because I believed I needed to speak with you, and I did not expect to arrive at the exact moment your fiancé chose to disappear." "That's not an answer," Elena said. "That's half of one. It's the truth, as much of it as I can give you today," Cale said. "I know that is not enough. I am not asking you to marry me, because I expect you to understand everything in this moment. I am asking, because I believe, given time, this arrangement could serve us both well, and because I could not stand by and watch you face this crowd alone, with nothing to hold on to but humiliation." Elena studied him for a long moment, this strange, calm stranger with his impossible proposal and his half-truths. Everything about the situation told her to walk away, to call a car, to go home, and grieve the wreckage of her wedding day in peace. But something else, some small, stubborn part of her that refused to be broken by Daniel's cruelty, whispered that walking back into that chapel and marrying this stranger might be the only way to walk out of this day with her head held high, instead of bowed in shame. "If I say yes," Elena said slowly, "and I am not saying I will, but if I did, what exactly would this arrangement look like?" "A partnership," Cale said, "built on respect, not deception. I would ask nothing of you that you did not agree to freely, and I would give you my full protection and support in return. You would want for nothing. You would answer to no one but yourself." "That sounds like a business deal." "In some ways, it would begin as one," Cale admitted. "But I do not believe it would have to end that way." Elena looked past him, back toward the chapel, where she could still hear the low hum of 200 voices, speculating about what had just happened and what might happen next. She thought of her mother's face, pale with shock. She thought of Daniel's message, cold and final on her phone screen. She thought of the years she had spent building a life around a man who could not even find the courage to tell her the truth to her face. She thought too of the alternative, walking back inside alone, facing every one of those curious, pitying stares, and driving home in her wedding dress to an empty apartment, where she would spend the rest of the evening replaying 11 words over and over in her mind. "If I say yes," she said quietly, "it's because I choose it. Not because I have nothing else. Do you understand that?" "I understand it completely," Cale said. "I would not want it any other way." Elena stood slowly from the low wall, smoothing down the skirt of her wedding dress, with hands that had finally stopped shaking. She looked at this stranger, this man with pale gray eyes, and an offer that defied every rule of sense and caution she had lived by her entire life, and she felt something shift inside her chest, some door closing on the life she had planned, and another, unknown door creaking open in its place. "Give me 5 minutes," she said. "I need to speak with my mother first." "Take as long as you need," Cale said. "I am not going anywhere." Elena walked back toward the chapel doors, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and something else, something she could not yet name. Behind her, the man who called himself Cale Draven remained standing in the quiet garden, patient as stone, waiting to see what she would decide. She did not know, as she walked back into that room full of curious faces, that the choice she was about to make would carry her far beyond anything she could have imagined that morning, when she had woken up thinking only of flowers and vows and a future that no longer existed. She did not know about the pack waiting for their king's return, about the political storm gathering just beyond the borders of the world she knew, or about the ancient blood running quietly through her own veins, waiting for the right moment to wake. All she knew, standing at the threshold of the chapel doors with her ruined bouquet still clutched in one hand, was that the life she had planned was over, and something entirely new was waiting to begin. Elena found her mother standing near the front pew, still pale, still clutching a folded program in one hand, as though it were the only solid thing left in the room. When she saw Elena walking toward her, her face crumpled with worry. "Sweetheart," her mother whispered, pulling her into a tight hug that smelled of familiar perfume and years of comfort. "What happened out there? Who is that man? Are you all right?" "I don't know yet," Elena admitted, pulling back just enough to look her mother in the eyes. "But I need to talk to you about something, and I need you to trust me, even though none of this makes sense right now." Her mother's eyes widened as Elena explained, in quick, quiet words, what Cale Draven had offered her in the garden. She watched her mother's expression shift from confusion to alarm to something more complicated, something that looked almost like recognition. "Draven," her mother repeated softly, almost to herself. "I know that name. Your father used to speak of a family by that name, years ago, before he passed. He said they were powerful people, people who moved through the world differently than we did." "What does that mean?" Elena asked. Her mother shook her head slowly. "I never understood it fully. He never explained. But he always said, if a Draven ever came looking for our family, it would not be by accident." Elena felt a chill move through her despite the warmth of the chapel. She thought of Cale's words in the garden, his admission that their families shared some kind of business history, his careful refusal to explain further. There was more happening here than a stranger's spontaneous kindness toward a jilted bride. There was history, buried and unspoken, reaching up through the years to find her on the worst day of her life. "I still don't understand what any of that means," Elena said, "but I have a decision to make, and I don't have much time to make it." Her mother reached up and cupped Elena's face gently in both hands, the way she had done when Elena was a child frightened by thunderstorms. "I cannot tell you what to do, sweetheart. I can only tell you that Daniel showed you exactly who he was today, and whatever happens next, you deserve better than the coward who ran. If this man offers you something real, something built on respect instead of lies, then perhaps this strange, terrible day was meant to lead you somewhere better." Elena felt fresh tears prick at her eyes, though these were different from the ones she had cried in the garden. "You're not going to tell me I'm being reckless? Marrying a stranger the same day my engagement fell apart? I am going to tell you that grief makes fools of us all, and so does fear," her mother said. "But I have never once seen you make a decision without thinking it through first. Not even now. Not even standing here in this dress with your heart in pieces. If some part of you believes this is the right path, then I trust that part of you more than I trust the chaos of today." Elena hugged her mother tightly one more time, drawing strength from the familiar warmth of her embrace, before straightening her shoulders and turning back toward the chapel doors. The guests had grown quieter now, watching her return with an air of hushed anticipation, as though they were watching the second act of a play none of them had expected to see. Cale stood near the altar, exactly where she had left him, his expression unreadable, but his posture patient and steady. When their eyes met across the length of the aisle, something passed between them, some silent question and its silent answer. Elena walked toward him, and this time, her steps did not falter. "Before I say anything," she said, low enough that only he could hear, "I need you to understand something. I am not doing this because I am desperate, or because I have nowhere else to go. I am doing this because today, for reasons I do not fully understand, you offered me something no one else in this room did. You offered me a choice, and I am choosing it, on my own terms, not because I am broken, but because I refuse to let today break me." "I would not want it any other way," Cale said again, echoing his words from the garden, and this time there was the faintest hint of something warmer in his pale eyes. The priest, who had been watching the entire exchange with an expression somewhere between disbelief and professional composure, cleared his throat. "I must ask," he said carefully, "given the circumstances, whether this is truly the wish of both parties present. It is, Elena said, surprising herself with the steadiness in her own voice. It is, Cale agreed. A murmur swept through the guests, disbelief and astonishment mixing together into a low hum of sound. Elena's best friend, still standing nearby with her bouquet forgotten at her side, looked as though she might faint from shock. Somewhere near the back, someone actually laughed, a short, startled bark of sound, quickly muffled by an elbow. The priest looked between them for a long moment, weighing the strangeness of the situation against 30 years of experience presiding over every kind of wedding imaginable. Finally, he nodded slowly. Very well, he said, though I confess, in all my years, I have never conducted a ceremony quite like this one. What followed passed in a blur for Elena, as though she were watching herself from somewhere just outside her own body. The priest asked Cale to state his intentions, and Cale spoke clearly, calmly, without a trace of hesitation, promising protection, honesty, and partnership in words that felt strangely more solid than the traditional vows Elena had once expected to exchange with Daniel. When it was her turn, Elena found the words easier to speak than she had imagined, perhaps because she was no longer promising forever to a fantasy, but choosing, deliberately and clearly, a path forward for herself. There were no rings prepared for this moment, but Cale reached into his jacket pocket and produced a simple band of dark silver metal, plain and unadorned, as though he had been carrying it with him for exactly this purpose. Elena did not ask how or why he happened to have it. There would be time for questions later. For now, she simply extended her hand and let him slide it onto her finger, watching the metal catch the light in a way that seemed almost to shimmer. You may exchange a token of your union, the priest said, his voice still carrying a note of disbelief. If you wish. Cale did not kiss her, and Elena was grateful for that small mercy, some boundary of respect observed, even in the strangeness of the moment. Instead, he simply took her hand in both of his grip warm and steady, and bowed his head slightly toward her, a gesture that felt somehow more intimate than any kiss could have been. Thank you, he said quietly, so only she could hear, for trusting me with today, even when you had no reason to. Elena did not know how to answer that, so she said nothing at all, only nodded, and let the moment settle over her like a held breath finally released. The priest pronounced them married, his voice carrying the same words he had spoken over countless couples before, though never under circumstances like these. A ripple of applause moved through the stunned guests, hesitant at first, then growing steadier as the shock of the afternoon began to give way to something like acceptance. Elena's mother was crying openly now, though whether from sorrow or relief, or some combination of both, Elena could not tell. As they walked back down the aisle together, Elena on the arm of a man she had known for less than an hour, she caught sight of familiar faces blurring past her, some smiling, some still frowning in confusion, all of them witnesses to a day that would be talked about for years to come. She held her head high, refusing to let the whispers or the stares diminish the strange, fragile dignity she had managed to reclaim in the space of a single afternoon. Outside the chapel, a black car waited at the curb, sleek and unmarked, with a driver already standing beside the open rear door. Elena paused on the top step, looking back once at the chapel where her old life had ended, and her new one had somehow, impossibly, begun. Are you ready? Cale asked beside her. No, Elena admitted honestly. But I don't think I have any choice but to find out what happens next. You always have a choice, Cale said. That is something I intend to make certain of, for as long as you allow me to. Elena looked at him for a long moment, this stranger who was now, somehow, her husband, and felt the first small flicker of curiosity break through the numbness of the day. Whatever waited for her beyond this moment, whatever truth lay hidden behind his calm gray eyes and careful half-answers, she had chosen to walk toward it with her own 2 feet, on her own terms. She descended the steps beside him, climbed into the waiting car, and let the door close behind her with a quiet, final click, sealing away the wedding that never happened, and opening the door to a story she could not yet begin to imagine. The car moved smoothly through the city streets, leaving behind the chapel, and the whispers, and the wreckage of the wedding that had never happened. Elena sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, still wearing her wedding gown, the silk fabric feeling strange and heavy against her skin, now that its purpose had changed so completely. Beside her, Cale sat in silence, giving her space, his gaze fixed on the passing scenery outside the tinted window. "I have questions," Elena said finally, breaking the quiet that had settled between them since they left the chapel. "I expected you would," Cale said. "Ask whatever you need to ask." "You said our families have business history. What kind of business?" "My father ran a small architecture firm. He designed buildings, not deals with powerful families like yours apparently is." Cale was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Your father's work extended beyond architecture, in ways you may not have known. He designed several properties for my family many years ago, before you were born. During that time, he became aware of certain things about us that most people never learn." "What kind of things?" "Things I am not prepared to explain fully today," Cale said, and though his tone remained gentle, there was a firmness beneath it that told Elena pressing further would not yield more answers. Not yet. "I know that is frustrating to hear. I promise you, the truth is not something I intend to keep from you forever, but some things require time and trust before they can be spoken aloud." Elena studied his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the careful stillness in the way he held himself, even in the small confines of the car. "You're asking me to trust a man I married, an hour after I was left at the altar by someone I trusted completely. Do you understand how difficult that is for me right now?" "I understand it more than you might think," Cale said, turning to look at her directly, for the first time since they had entered the car. "Trust is not something I ask for lightly, Elena. I know what it costs a person to give it, and I know what it costs to have it broken. I do not intend to break yours." Something in the way he said it, quiet and certain, made Elena believe him, even against her better judgment. She looked away, out the window, watching the city give way slowly to open countryside, as the car continued its journey away from everything familiar. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Home," Cale said simply. "My home, which I hope, in time, will become yours as well." The drive continued for nearly 2 hours, the city streets giving way to rolling hills, and then to dense forest, the road narrowing as they climbed higher into terrain that felt increasingly remote and wild. Elena watched the scenery change with a growing sense of unease, though Cale's calm presence beside her kept the unease from tipping over into full panic. "You live out here?" she asked, watching thick trees crowd close to the edges of the road. "Isn't this a bit far from everything?" "My family has always valued privacy," Cale said, "and space. You will understand more once we arrive." The car eventually turned onto a long private drive, flanked on either side by tall iron gates that opened automatically as they approached, as though the property itself recognized the vehicle and welcomed it home. Elena leaned forward slightly, straining to see through the windshield as the drive wound through more forest, before finally opening onto a wide clearing. What stood at the end of that drive took her breath away, despite everything that had already happened that day. It was not a house. It was closer to a fortress, built of dark gray stone with tall windows and steep roof lines, the kind of structure that looked as though it had stood for centuries and would stand for centuries more. Ivy climbed portions of the walls in careful, deliberate patterns, and the grounds surrounding the building were meticulously kept, with wide lawns and neatly trimmed hedges stretching out toward the surrounding tree line. "This is your house?" Elena asked, unable to keep the astonishment from her voice. "This is my home," Cale said, "and the seat of my family's affairs. There are people here I will need you to meet, and traditions you will need to understand. I know it is a great deal to absorb in one day." As the car pulled to a stop in front of the wide stone steps leading up to the main entrance, Elena noticed figures gathering near the doorway, watching the car's arrival with an intensity that made her nervous. There were perhaps a dozen people standing there, men and women of various ages, all dressed simply, but with a kind of watchful alertness that reminded Elena of guards awaiting orders, rather than household staff greeting a returning family member. "Who are they?" Elena asked quietly. "Members of my household," Cale said. "They will have heard by now that I returned with a wife. I imagine they are curious." Curious was not quite the word Elena would have chosen for the expressions she saw as she stepped out of the car, still in her wedding gown, her hair beginning to come loose from its careful styling after the long drive. Some of the faces watching her held simple curiosity, but others held something closer to suspicion, even hostility, quickly masked, but not quickly enough for Elena to miss entirely. A tall woman, with silver-streaked dark hair, stepped forward from the group, her expression carefully neutral, though her sharp eyes moved over Elena from head to toe with an assessing quality that made Elena feel as though she were being measured for something. "My king," the woman said, inclining her head toward Kale with obvious respect. "We received your message. We did not expect you to return with company." "Elena is my wife, Marin," Kale said, his tone leaving no room for debate or discussion. "She will be treated with the same respect afforded to any member of this household, and I expect that to be made clear to everyone here." Marin's gaze flickered briefly toward Elena again, something unreadable passing behind her eyes, before she nodded once. "Of course. Welcome, Elena. I am certain your arrival will be the subject of much conversation in the coming days." There was something in the way she said it that made Elena's skin prickle, though she could not have said exactly why. She glanced at Kale, searching his face for reassurance, and found his expression steady and calm, though a muscle tightened briefly in his jaw as he looked at Marin. "Show Elena to her rooms," Kale said. "I will join her shortly, once I have addressed a few matters that require my immediate attention." Elena felt a flicker of anxiety at the idea of being separated from Kale so soon, surrounded by strangers, in an unfamiliar place, but she said nothing, reminding herself that she had chosen this path, uncertain as it was, and that retreating into fear now would serve no purpose. Marin led her up the wide stone steps and through massive wooden doors into an entrance hall that seemed to stretch upward for several stories, lit by tall windows and an enormous chandelier hanging from the vaulted ceiling. The air inside smelled faintly of wood smoke and something else Elena could not quite identify, something earthy and wild that seemed strangely out of place in such an elegant setting. "This way," Marin said, leading her down a long corridor, lined with portraits of stern-faced men and women, dressed in clothing that spanned what looked like several centuries of changing fashion. Elena studied the faces as she passed, noticing a strange consistency among them, a shared quality in the eyes, pale and striking, not unlike Kale's own. "Are these all family members?" Elena asked. "Every king and queen who has led this household," Marin said, going back further than most records can accurately trace. "King and queen," Elena repeated slowly. "Kale mentioned that title before too. Is that just a family tradition, or something more formal?" Marin paused at the top of a wide staircase, turning to look at Elena with an expression that was difficult to read. "You truly do not know, do you?" "Know what?" "Nothing," Marin said, after a brief hesitation. "It is not my place to explain. That conversation belongs to Kale. I would only advise you, for your own comfort, to remain observant in the coming days. This household operates by rules that may seem unfamiliar to you at first." Before Elena could press further, Marin continued up the stairs, leaving Elena little choice but to follow, questions multiplying in her mind with every step. They reached a wide hallway on the third floor, and Marin stopped before a set of tall double doors carved with an intricate pattern of interlocking branches. "These will be your rooms," Marin said, pushing the doors open to reveal a spacious chamber, decorated in warm, rich tones, with a large bed, positioned near tall windows, overlooking the forest beyond the property's grounds. "I will have someone bring your belongings, once arrangements are made to retrieve them from your previous residence. In the meantime, there are clothes in the wardrobe that should fit you reasonably well." "Thank you," Elena said, though the word felt strange in her mouth, given the circumstances. Marin studied her for a long moment before speaking again, her voice quieter now, without the formal edge it had carried since their first meeting. "I do not know what convinced our king to bring you here in such an unusual way, but I have served this family for a long time, and I have never seen him act without careful reason. Whatever his purpose in choosing you, I suspect it runs deeper than either of you fully understands yet." With that cryptic statement, Marin turned and left, closing the tall doors behind her, with a soft click that seemed to echo in the sudden silence of the room. Elena stood alone for a long moment, still in her wedding gown, in a room she had never expected to occupy, in a house that felt more like a fortress than a home, surrounded by people who spoke in riddles and watched her with careful, guarded eyes. She walked slowly toward the tall windows, looking out over the dense forest stretching toward the horizon, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the treetops. Somewhere out there, beyond the borders of this strange new world, Her old life continued without her. Guests still discussing the wedding that had shattered into something no one had expected. Daniel, wherever he had run off to with her cousin, oblivious or indifferent to the chaos he had left behind. Elena pressed her palm against the cool glass of the window and closed her eyes, allowing herself, finally, to feel the full weight of everything that had happened in a single impossible day. She had lost the future she had planned. She had gained a husband she barely knew, a home she did not understand, and a growing certainty that there was far more happening beneath the surface of this family than anyone had yet told her. Whatever truth waited to be uncovered, Elena promised herself she would find it, one careful step at a time. Cale found her an hour later, still standing near the window, though the sun had begun to sink lower behind the trees, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and violet. He knocked once on the open door before stepping inside, his tall frame filling the doorway. "I hope Marin made you comfortable," he said. "She showed me the room," Elena said, turning to face him. "Comfortable might be a stretch, given everything." "That is fair," Cale said, moving further into the room, though he kept a respectful distance between them. "I imagine this entire day has felt like anything but comfortable." Elena crossed her arms, studying him carefully. "Marin said something strange before she left. She mentioned that this household operates by rules I might not understand. She also called you king, the same way you introduced yourself earlier, and mentioned queens and kings going back further than records could trace. I would like an explanation now, Cale. I think I've earned that much." Cale was quiet for a long moment, and Elena watched something shift behind his pale eyes, a decision being weighed and made. Finally, he gestured toward a small seating area near the window, two chairs positioned across from each other beside a low table. "Please, sit," he said. "This is not a short conversation, and I would rather you hear it properly than standing in the middle of a room still wearing your wedding gown." Elena hesitated, then moved to sit in one of the chairs, watching as Cale took the seat across from her, his posture straight and formal, as though he were preparing to deliver news he had rehearsed many times, but never actually spoken aloud. "My family," Cale began, "is not like other families. We come from a long line of people who carry something different within us, something that has been passed down through generations, hidden from the wider world for centuries." "Different how?" Elena asked, her heart beginning to beat faster. "We are able to change," Cale said carefully, "into another form, a form connected to the wolf. It is not something easily explained in a single sentence, and I understand how impossible this must sound to you." Elena stared at him, waiting for some sign that this was a joke, an elaborate story, meant to test her reaction. But Cale's expression remained utterly serious, his gray eyes steady and unwavering, as he watched her process what he had said. "You're telling me you can turn into a wolf," Elena said slowly, disbelief coloring every word. "Yes," Cale said simply. "That's not possible." "I understand why you would believe that," Cale said. "The wider world has spent centuries convincing itself that such things exist only in stories. It has made it easier for families like mine to remain hidden, to live among ordinary people without drawing attention to what we truly are. But I promise you, Elena, what I am telling you is the truth, and I would not lie to you about something so significant." Elena felt a strange, dizzying sensation wash over her, as though the ground beneath her chair had suddenly tilted at an unfamiliar angle. She thought of the portraits lining the hallway, the strange, pale eyes shared across generations, the watchful, alert postures of the household staff who had gathered to greet the car. She thought of the word Marin had used, king, spoken with such casual formality, as though it were simply a fact of daily life, rather than a title reserved for fairy tales. "Prove it," Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. Cale studied her for a long moment, as though weighing the wisdom of granting such a request, so soon after revealing something so significant. Finally, he rose from his chair and walked toward the center of the room, putting several feet of distance between himself and Elena. "I need you to remain calm," he said. "What you are about to see will look unsettling at first, but I promise you, there is nothing to fear." Elena's pulse hammered in her throat as she watched him close his eyes and take a slow, steadying breath. What happened next unfolded faster than her mind could fully track, a blur of motion and shifting shadow, bones and muscle rearranging themselves in ways that should have been impossible, painful, unnatural. Where Kale had stood a moment before, a massive wolf now stood in his place, its fur a deep charcoal gray, its eyes the same striking pale color she had come to recognize, watching her with unmistakable intelligence and patience. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She gripped the arms of her chair, her mind reeling, trying and failing to reconcile the calm, composed man she had married just hours before, with the enormous creature now standing several feet away, its powerful frame radiating quiet strength. The wolf did not move closer. It simply stood, watching her, waiting, giving her the time she needed to absorb what she was seeing. Slowly, carefully, Elena forced herself to breathe, forced her racing heart to steady. "Kale?" she said quietly, though she already knew the answer. The wolf's ears twitched slightly at the sound of her voice, and then the same blur of motion reversed itself, bones and muscle shifting back into familiar shape, until Kale stood before her once more, fully dressed, as though nothing unusual had happened at all. "I know this is a great deal to take in," he said gently, watching her carefully for signs of distress. Elena sat in stunned silence for a long moment, her mind racing through everything she had just witnessed, searching for some rational explanation, and finding none. Finally she spoke, her voice steadier than she expected. "That's why my father knew your family. He designed buildings for people who needed privacy, who needed to hide something like this from the world." "Yes," Kale said. "Your father was more perceptive than most humans who worked with us. He discovered the truth eventually, though he never spoke of it to anyone outside our agreement, and he never used what he learned against us. My family trusted him, and in time, came to consider him something close to a friend." "And me?" Elena asked. "Why does any of this involve me? I'm human. I've never shown any sign of being anything other than completely ordinary." Kale's expression grew more careful, more measured. "That is a more complicated question, and one I do not have a complete answer to yet. But there are indications, based on old records connected to your family line, that you may carry something within you that has remained dormant, waiting." "Waiting for what?" "I don't know yet," Kale admitted. "But I believe it is connected to why my family has taken such interest in yours over the years, and why I felt compelled to intervene today, at your wedding, in a way I would not normally consider appropriate." Elena sat back in her chair, overwhelmed by the sheer weight of everything she had learned in the span of a single conversation. Wolves, ancient bloodlines, some unknown potential hidden within her own body, waiting for a reason to wake. It was too much, too fast, layered on top of a day that had already shattered every expectation she had walked into that chapel with. "I need time," she said finally, "to process all of this." "Of course," Kale said, rising from his position near the center of the room. "Take whatever time you need. I will not press you for more than you are ready to give." "There's something else I need to know," Elena said, stopping him before he could leave. "Marin's reaction to me, when we arrived, it wasn't just curiosity. Some of the others looked at me the same way, like I don't belong here." Kale's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "There are those within this household who do not yet understand my reasons for bringing you here. Some have concerns about a human joining our family so suddenly, particularly given the circumstances of our marriage. I will address those concerns directly. You need not worry about your safety here. I will not allow anyone to treat you with disrespect." "That's reassuring," Elena said, though her tone carried more uncertainty than gratitude. "But I'd rather understand why they're concerned in the first place, instead of just being told not to worry." "In time," Kale said. "I promise you, Elena, everything will become clear. But some truths require patience before they can be fully understood, and I would rather give them to you carefully than overwhelm you further in a single evening." Elena studied him for a long moment, weighing his words, weighing the strange, impossible reality she now found herself standing in the middle of. Whatever fear or hesitation lingered in her chest, she found it tangled together with something else, something unexpected, a fierce, stubborn curiosity that refused to let her simply retreat and hide from what she had learned. "All right," she said finally. "Patience. But not forever, Kale. I deserve the full truth eventually, and I intend to hold you to that promise." "You will have it," Kale said. "I give you my word." Outside the tall windows, the last light of day faded into deep blue twilight, stars beginning to emerge over the dark silhouette of the surrounding forest. Elena sat quietly for a long moment after Kale left the room, staring out at the gathering darkness, trying to make sense of a world that had, in the span of a single day, revealed itself to be far stranger and far larger than she had ever imagined. The days that followed settled into an uneasy rhythm, one Elena found herself adjusting to with a mixture of fascination and quiet unease. Each morning, she woke in the large bedroom overlooking the forest, momentarily forgetting where she was, before the strange reality of her new life came rushing back. Each day, she learned something new about the household she had married into, piece by careful piece, though she quickly discovered that some truths were offered freely, while others had to be earned through patience and observation. She learned that the estate was home to nearly 60 members of Kale's pack, a term she came to understand referred not simply to family, but to a tightly bound community, bound together by loyalty, hierarchy, and shared history, stretching back generations. Some members lived permanently on the grounds, occupying smaller homes scattered through the surrounding forest, while others came and went, attending to business or family matters beyond the estate's borders. Marin, Elena discovered, held a position of significant authority within the household, serving as something between an advisor and a steward, managing the daily operations of the estate, while also holding considerable influence over pack matters. Her initial coolness toward Elena did not entirely fade, though it softened slightly over the first week, replaced by a kind of watchful, evaluating distance that Elena found almost more unsettling than open hostility. "You handle yourself well," Marin commented one morning, finding Elena in the estate's expansive library, where Elena had taken to spending her mornings reading whatever books she could find that might shed light on the strange new world she had entered. Most humans brought suddenly into this life crumble within days. "You have not." "I don't have much choice but to adapt," Elena said, closing the book in her lap. "Falling apart wouldn't change anything about my situation." "A practical outlook," Marin said, studying her with those sharp, assessing eyes. "Kale chose well, in that respect. Whatever else remains uncertain about his reasoning." "What exactly is uncertain?" Elena asked, seizing the opening. "Everyone here seems to know something about me that I don't know myself. I'd like someone to actually tell me, instead of speaking around it." Marin's expression grew guarded again, the brief warmth retreating behind careful neutrality. "That is a conversation for Kale to have with you, when he judges the time is right." "He keeps saying that," Elena said, frustration creeping into her voice. "In time, when the moment is right. I'm starting to wonder if there will ever be a moment he considers right, or if I'm simply meant to live here in ignorance indefinitely." Something flickered across Marin's face, something that might have been sympathy, quickly suppressed. "Our king is not a man who acts without careful thought, Elena. If he is withholding information, it is because he believes doing so protects you, not because he wishes to keep you ignorant." "Protects me from what?" Marin hesitated, clearly weighing how much she was willing to say. "There are those beyond this estate who would see value in what you might become, value they would not hesitate to exploit for their own purposes. The less widely known your significance, the safer you remain, at least for now." Before Elena could press further, Marin excused herself, leaving Elena alone once again, with more questions than answers, though this small exchange had at least confirmed what she had already begun to suspect. Whatever hidden potential Kale believed she carried within her, it was significant enough to attract dangerous attention, and significant enough that the entire household seemed determined to keep her sheltered from full understanding of it. That evening, Elena found Kale in his study, a large room lined with tall bookshelves and a heavy wooden desk positioned near a fireplace that crackled softly against the evening chill. He looked up as she entered, setting aside a stack of papers he had been reviewing. "Elena," he said, rising slightly from his chair, "I wasn't expecting you this evening." "I spoke with Marin today," Elena said, closing the door behind her. "She mentioned that people beyond this estate might want to exploit whatever it is you believe I carry within me. That sounds like something I should probably know more about, given that it apparently puts me in danger." Kale's expression grew serious, and he gestured for her to sit in the chair across from his desk. "I had hoped to give you more time before this conversation became necessary. But you are right to expect more from me than careful silence." "Then explain it to me," Elena said, settling into the chair. "All of it, this time. No more half answers." Kale leaned back in his own chair, studying her for a long moment before beginning. "Centuries ago, before recorded history as most people understand it, There existed several bloodlines among our kind that carried what we call the old blood, a form of our nature significantly more powerful than what most pack members possess today. Over generations, through careful breeding and, eventually, through unions with humans that diluted the bloodline further, that old power became increasingly rare, until it was believed to have vanished entirely from the world. And you think I have it, Elena said, even though I've never shown any sign of being anything other than fully human. Old blood can remain dormant for generations, passed down quietly through human bloodlines without ever manifesting, until specific conditions cause it to awaken, Kale explained. Your father's connection to my family was not accidental. When he began working with us, our historians discovered records suggesting his own lineage traced back to one of the old bloodlines, diluted over centuries of human intermarriage, but not entirely extinguished. Elena sat in stunned silence, absorbing this information slowly. So you think I might be able to do what you do? Change, like you did in front of me. I believe it is possible, Kale said, though I do not know with certainty how or when such a transformation might occur, or what conditions might be necessary to trigger it. Old blood is unpredictable in ways modern pack lineages are not. And the danger Marin mentioned? Kale's expression darkened slightly. There are rival packs and individuals within our broader community who have long sought to reclaim old blood for themselves, believing it would restore power and influence they lost generations ago. If word spread that a bloodline carrying old blood had been identified, and that bloodline was connected to a human woman with no pack protection of her own, there are those who would not hesitate to use whatever means necessary to claim that power for themselves. Elena felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. Is that why you proposed to me at the wedding? Not because you cared what happened to me, but because you wanted to secure whatever is inside me before someone else found it first? No, Kale said immediately, his voice firm and certain. I will not deny that your bloodline played a role in why I first became aware of you, and why I attended your wedding at all. But the offer I made you, the choice I gave you, was not calculated. I watched you stand at that altar, abandoned and humiliated by a man who did not deserve even a fraction of your loyalty, and something in me refused to let you face that moment alone. Whatever else exists between us, whatever complicated history brought us to this point, my respect for you is not a performance, Elena. It is real. Elena studied his face carefully, searching for any hint of deception, and found none, only quiet, steady sincerity that matched everything else she had come to know about him in the short time they had spent together. I want to believe you, she said quietly. Then believe me, Kale said. And give me the chance to prove it, through actions rather than words alone. Elena sat with his words for a long moment, feeling the weight of everything she had learned settle over her like a heavy cloak. Old blood, rival packs, hidden dangers lurking beyond the walls of this fortress she now called home. It was overwhelming, frightening in ways she had not fully anticipated when she agreed to marry a stranger on the worst day of her life. And yet, beneath the fear, she felt something else stirring, something unexpected. A fierce, growing determination, not to be defined by fear, not to let the uncertainty of her circumstances make her small or passive. If there truly was power sleeping somewhere within her, she intended to understand it, to claim it as her own, rather than simply waiting anxiously for others to decide her fate around her. I want to learn, she said finally, about my family's history, about what old blood actually means, about everything you and your household have been so carefully protecting me from. I won't be kept in the dark any longer, Kale. If I'm going to be part of this world, I need to understand it fully, dangers and all. Kale studied her for a long moment, something that might have been admiration flickering behind his pale eyes. Very well, he said. I will arrange for our historians to begin working with you, and I will personally ensure you have access to whatever records exist regarding your family's connection to the old bloodlines. But I ask one thing in return. What? That you allow me to be part of that journey with you, Kale said. Not simply as your protector, but as your partner in uncovering whatever truth waits to be found. Elena considered his words carefully, weighing the strange, complicated trust that had begun to grow between them, despite everything that stood in its way. Finally, she nodded. All right, she said, partners. Outside the study windows, the forest had fallen into deep darkness. Stars scattered across the clear night sky above the towering trees. Somewhere beyond those borders, unknown dangers waited, patient and watchful, for the moment when Elena's hidden nature might finally begin to stir. But for now, within the walls of Kale's stone fortress, she felt something she had not expected to feel again so soon after the devastation of her wedding day. A fragile, growing sense of purpose, and the quiet beginnings of trust in a man she was only just beginning to understand. Weeks passed, and Elena settled into a routine that would have seemed impossible to imagine only a month before. Mornings were spent in the estate's library, working alongside an elderly pack historian named Wren, a small, sharp-eyed woman who possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of bloodlines and old records stretching back centuries. Together they pored over faded documents and hand-drawn family trees, tracing the threads of Elena's ancestry back through generations of quiet human lives that had, unknowingly, carried something extraordinary within them. Afternoons often found Elena walking the estate's grounds, sometimes alone, sometimes accompanied by Kale when his responsibilities allowed it. She had begun to notice small things about him during these walks, details she had missed in the chaos of their first meeting, the way his expression softened almost imperceptibly when he thought no one was watching, the careful attention he paid to every member of his household, remembering names and small personal details that most leaders in his position might have considered beneath their notice. "You're staring," Kale observed one afternoon, as they walked along a path bordering the edge of the forest, autumn leaves crunching softly beneath their feet. "Sorry," Elena said, though she did not look away immediately. "I keep trying to reconcile the man who turned into a wolf in front of me with the man who apparently remembers the name of every single person who works on this estate, including their children's names and birthdays." Kale's mouth curved into something that was almost, though not quite, a smile. "Is that so difficult to reconcile?" "A little," Elena admitted. "Most powerful people I've known care more about power than about small details like a groundskeeper's daughter's birthday. Perhaps that is precisely why I have managed to hold this position as long as I have," Kale said. "Power built on fear crumbles eventually. Power built on genuine care tends to endure." Elena considered this, walking in comfortable silence beside him for several more paces. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Of course. Why haven't you married before now? You're clearly not young, at least not by the standards of ordinary human aging, and someone in your position, I would imagine, faces considerable pressure to secure an heir, form alliances, all of that." Kale was quiet for a long moment, and Elena wondered if she had overstepped some unspoken boundary. But when he finally spoke, his voice carried a quiet honesty that surprised her. "I have avoided it, largely," he said. "Every union offered to me throughout the years has been built on calculation rather than genuine connection. Alliances between powerful families, arrangements meant to consolidate strength or resources. I found the prospect exhausting, if I am honest. I did not want to spend my life bound to someone who saw me only as a means to an end." "And now you're bound to me," Elena said. "Someone you barely knew before our wedding, who happens to carry something valuable inside her that your entire community apparently wants." Kale stopped walking, turning to face her fully, his gray eyes steady and searching. "I understand why you might believe that is all this is. But I promise you, Elena, whatever calculations existed in my mind before I walked into that chapel dissolved the moment I saw you standing there, abandoned, refusing to let your humiliation break you. What I felt in that moment was not calculation. It was something far simpler and far more difficult to explain."
"What was it?"
Elena asked quietly.
"Recognition,"
Kale said, "as though I had been waiting, without fully realizing it, for someone exactly like you to walk into my life." Elena felt her breath catch slightly at the quiet sincerity in his voice, and for a moment, standing there in the golden light of the late afternoon sun filtering through the autumn trees, the careful distance she had maintained between them since their strange wedding day felt thinner than it had before. "I don't know what to do with that," she admitted honestly. "You don't have to do anything with it," Kale said. "I only wanted you to know it was true." They continued their walk in comfortable silence after that, though something had shifted subtly between them, a quiet warmth that had not existed before, fragile but undeniably present. Elena found herself thinking about his words long after they returned to the estate, replaying them in her mind as she prepared for bed that evening, uncertain what to make of the growing feelings stirring within her chest. The following week brought a new development in Elena's research with Ren. Deep within a collection of records dating back nearly 200 years, they discovered a detailed account of an old bloodline family, the Ashfords, who had once carried significant old blood power before a violent conflict scattered the family across the countryside, forcing many members to abandon their identities entirely and assimilate quietly into ordinary human communities. Ashford, Elena repeated, staring at the name written in faded ink on the yellowed page. That was my grandmother's maiden name. Ren's sharp eyes lit up with excitement. This confirms what our earlier research suggested. Your connection to the old bloodline runs directly through your grandmother's family, which explains why records of it grew increasingly obscure over the generations. Your family deliberately hid their history, likely out of fear following whatever conflict scattered the Ashfords in the first place. What kind of conflict? Elena asked. Ren's expression grew more somber as she turned several pages further into the record, revealing an account of a violent power struggle between rival packs, one that had resulted in the near total destruction of the Ashford bloodline, its surviving members forced into hiding to avoid further persecution. A rival pack, led by a family whose descendants remain active in our world today, sought to eliminate the Ashfords entirely, believing their old blood power posed a threat to the rival family's own ambitions for dominance, Ren explained. The conflict was brutal and largely successful in its aims. Only a small handful of Ashford descendants managed to escape, scattering across the region and abandoning their true identities to avoid detection. Elena felt a chill move through her as she absorbed this information. You're telling me there's a family out there, right now, that once tried to wipe out my ancestors because of what they carried inside them? It is possible, Ren said carefully, that the descendants of that rival family remain unaware your bloodline survived at all. But if word were to spread that an Ashford descendant has been identified, and that she now resides within the protection of our king's household, it would almost certainly draw their attention once again. Elena sat back in her chair, the weight of this discovery settling heavily over her. She thought of Marin's earlier warning, of Kale's careful caution in revealing the full truth of her situation, and understood now, with much greater clarity, exactly what kind of danger she had unknowingly stepped into the moment she agreed to marry a stranger at her ruined wedding. She found Kale later that evening in his study, and relayed everything Ren had uncovered, watching his expression grow increasingly grave as she spoke. I suspected something along these lines, he admitted, once she had finished. Though I had hoped, perhaps foolishly, that the specific history might prove less severe than what your research has now confirmed. You knew there was a rival family that might come after me, and you still brought me here, Elena said, though there was no accusation in her voice, only a need to understand the full shape of the danger she now faced. I knew there was risk, Kale said. I did not know the full extent of that history until now. And I want you to understand, Elena, that regardless of what danger this discovery brings, I do not regret bringing you into this household. I will simply need to take additional precautions to ensure your safety. Precautions I should perhaps have already begun implementing. What kind of precautions? Increased security around the estate, Kale said. Limited information regarding your specific bloodline shared beyond those who already know. And, in time, training to help you understand and potentially control whatever abilities the old blood might grant you, should it ever awaken fully. Elena nodded slowly, absorbing the seriousness of the situation settling over them both. I'm scared, she admitted quietly, the honesty surprising even herself. Kale crossed the room and, for the first time since their wedding day, reached out to take her hand gently in his own, his grip warm and steady, offering comfort without demanding anything in return. I will not let anything happen to you, he said, his voice carrying quiet, unshakable certainty. Whatever comes, whoever comes, I will stand between you and that danger for as long as I draw breath. Elena looked up at him, feeling the warmth of his hand around hers, and found herself believing him completely, despite every reasonable doubt that circumstance and caution might have otherwise demanded. The knock at the estate's main gate came on a gray, rain-soaked afternoon nearly 2 months after Elena's arrival, unexpected and unannounced. Elena was in the library with Ren when word reached them that visitors had arrived requesting an audience with Kale, and something in the tone of the messenger who delivered the news made Elena's stomach tighten with unease. "Who is it?" Elena asked, setting aside the book she had been studying. "I don't know," Ren admitted, her sharp eyes narrowing with concern. "But visitors rarely arrive at this estate without prior arrangement. I suggest we find out together." They made their way to the estate's main hall, where a small crowd had already gathered, drawn by the unusual disturbance. Elena spotted Marin near the front entrance, her posture rigid with tension, speaking in low, urgent tones to another pack member Elena did not recognize. When Marin caught sight of Elena approaching, her expression tightened further. "You should return to your rooms," Marin said quietly, moving to intercept her before she could reach the main doors. "Why?" Elena asked. "Who's here?" Before Marin could answer, the heavy front doors swung open, admitting a gust of cold, rain-soaked air, along with two figures Elena recognized immediately, despite the 2 months and countless changes that had passed since she had last seen either of them. Daniel stood in the doorway, looking thinner than Elena remembered, his expensive coat soaked through from the rain, his expression a strange mixture of nervousness and forced confidence. Beside him stood Vivian, Elena's cousin, her chin lifted with defiant bravado that did little to mask the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes as she took in the grandeur of the estate surrounding them. "Elena," Daniel said, his voice carrying an unsteady note that had not been there during their years together. "I heard you were here. I needed to see for myself if it was true." The room seemed to hold its breath around her, dozens of pack members watching the strange reunion unfold with undisguised curiosity. Elena felt a rush of complicated emotion, anger and disbelief tangled together, though beneath it, she noticed with some surprise, the raw devastation she had expected to feel at seeing him again simply was not there. "What are you doing here, Daniel?" Elena asked, her voice steadier than she expected. "I made a terrible mistake," Daniel said, taking a step further into the hall, ignoring the tension radiating from the pack members watching him closely. "Leaving you the way I did, at the altar, in front of everyone. I panicked. I let fear get the better of me, and I have regretted it every single day since." "You didn't just leave," Elena said, her voice sharpening. "You ran off with my cousin. You sent me a text message with 11 words, and then disappeared. That's not panic, Daniel. That's cowardice and cruelty." Vivian shifted uncomfortably beside him, her earlier defiance faltering slightly under the weight of Elena's steady gaze. "Elena, please, if you'll just let us explain." "I don't want an explanation," Elena said, cutting her off. "I wanted honesty, months ago, before you humiliated me in front of 200 people. That opportunity has passed." Daniel's expression grew desperate, and he took another step forward, only to be halted by a low, warning growl that rumbled from somewhere near the entrance. Elena turned to see Cale standing there, having arrived silently while the confrontation unfolded, his expression carved from cold, controlled fury as he watched Daniel move toward Elena. "You will not take another step," Cale said, his voice carrying a quiet authority that silenced the entire room instantly. "This is my household, and Elena is my wife. Whatever business brought you here, state it clearly, or leave immediately." Daniel's confidence crumbled visibly under Cale's steady, dangerous gaze. "I only wanted to talk to Elena, to explain what happened, and to see if there was any chance." "There is no chance," Elena said firmly, stepping forward to stand beside Cale, drawing strength from his presence beside her. "Whatever we had ended the moment you chose to disappear, rather than face me honestly. I've built a new life since then, Daniel. I'm not the same woman you left standing at that altar." Vivian's expression shifted suddenly, calculation replacing her earlier discomfort as she studied the grandeur of the estate around them, the obvious wealth and power evident in every detail of the household. "This is quite the upgrade," she said, a bitter edge creeping into her voice. "I suppose being abandoned worked out well for you, in the end." "Careful," Cale said, his voice dropping into something colder and more dangerous. "You are speaking in my home, to my wife, and I would advise considerable caution in how you choose your words." Vivian's bravado wavered under the weight of his gaze, but before she could respond, Ren, who had been standing quietly near the edge of the gathering, stepped forward with a look of sudden, sharp recognition on her face. "Vivian," she said slowly, "that name. Would your mother happen to be named Corinne, by any chance?" Vivian blinked, clearly caught off guard by the unexpected question. Yes, actually. How would you know that? Ren's expression darkened with sudden understanding, and she turned to exchange a meaningful glance with Kale. My king, I believe we need to speak privately, immediately. Kale's brow furrowed slightly, though he nodded, gesturing for Daniel and Vivian to be escorted to a separate waiting room, while he, Elena, and Ren retreated to the privacy of his study. What is it? Elena asked, once the study door had closed behind them. Corinne, Ren said, her voice tight with urgency, is a name I recognized from the very records we have been studying. She is connected, through several generations, to the rival family responsible for scattering the Ashford bloodline all those years ago. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. Vivian is related to the family that tried to destroy my ancestors? It would appear so, Ren said. Distantly, perhaps, but the connection is there in the records. It cannot be coincidence that she happened to become engaged, however briefly, to the very man who was set to marry you, only for that engagement to collapse in such dramatic fashion, drawing your presence directly into this household. Kale's expression had grown increasingly grave as he listened, pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place with unsettling clarity. You believe this was orchestrated, that Daniel's betrayal and Vivian's involvement were not simply the result of a personal affair, but part of some larger design to isolate Elena and expose her to danger. It is a possibility that must be considered seriously, Ren said, particularly given their unexpected arrival here today, so soon after we uncovered the historical connection to the Ashford conflict. Elena felt sick with the implications settling over her, the devastating heartbreak of her wedding day, suddenly reframed as something far more calculated and sinister than simple romantic betrayal. You think Daniel and Vivian were used, somehow, to manipulate the situation. Perhaps unknowingly, perhaps not, Kale said grimly. I intend to find out exactly what they know, and how much of today's visit was genuine remorse, and how much was reconnaissance on behalf of interests hostile to your safety. He moved toward the study door with purposeful strides, and Elena followed close behind, determined not to be left out of whatever confrontation was about to unfold. When they returned to the waiting room where Daniel and Vivian had been left under careful watch, Kale's demeanor had shifted into something colder, more commanding, the full weight of his authority as pack leader evident in every measured step. I have questions for both of you, Kale said, his voice leaving no room for evasion. And I expect complete honesty, given the circumstances that have just come to light. Daniel and Vivian exchanged nervous glances, clearly sensing the shift in atmosphere, though neither seemed to fully understand the depth of the situation they had unwittingly walked into. Elena watched them carefully, searching for any sign of deception or hidden knowledge, uncertain what truth, if any, would emerge from the confrontation about to unfold. Whatever answers came next, Elena understood now that her wedding day disaster had been only the first thread in a much larger, more dangerous tapestry, one that stretched back generations and was only now beginning to reveal its true shape. I don't understand what any of this has to do with anything, Daniel said, his nervous confusion evident as Kale pressed him with careful, pointed questions about the circumstances surrounding his sudden departure from the wedding. I told you, I panicked. Vivian and I had been talking for weeks, growing close, and when the day came, I simply couldn't go through with marrying Elena while feeling what I felt for someone else. And how did that closeness with Vivian begin? Kale asked, his tone carefully controlled despite the tension radiating from him. Who introduced you? Was it a chance meeting, or did someone arrange for your paths to cross? Daniel's brow furrowed in confusion. It was at a work event, actually. Vivian's mother was there. Some kind of business function. She introduced us. Said she thought we'd have a lot in common given our shared interests. Elena felt a chill move through her, watching Ren's expression grow increasingly grim beside her. Corinne introduced you, Ren said quietly. That confirms it was not coincidence. Vivian's face had gone pale, her earlier defiance crumbling entirely under the weight of the conversation unfolding around her. My mother has always taken an unusual interest in my relationships, she admitted slowly. She encouraged me to get close to Daniel almost from the beginning, even before Elena's engagement was public knowledge. I thought it was strange at the time, but I didn't question it. Did she ever mention Elena specifically? Kale asked. Or express any particular interest in disrupting her wedding? Vivian hesitated, clearly wrestling with some memory she had not previously connected to the current situation. She asked me, more than once, to find out details about Elena's family history, her grandmother specifically. I thought it was just typical family curiosity, the kind of thing mothers ask about when their daughters befriend someone new. But now, hearing all of this, she trailed off, the full implications settling over her visibly, her earlier bitterness toward Elena replaced by dawning horror at the realization that she had been used as an unwitting instrument in something far larger than a simple romantic betrayal. I need to know everything your mother has ever told you about our family, Elena said, stepping forward, her voice steady despite the storm of emotion churning beneath the surface. Every detail, no matter how small it might seem. Vivian nodded slowly, some of her earlier hostility replaced by genuine, chastened concern. She's always spoken about an old grievance, something involving a family dispute from generations back. She never gave specifics, but she spoke of it with real anger, as though it were personal, even though it happened long before either of us was born. She mentioned, more than once, that she believed certain families had stolen something that rightfully belonged to ours, and that she intended to see it returned someday. Stolen power, Ren said quietly. The old blood. It seems Corinne's family has held onto that grievance for generations, waiting for an opportunity to reclaim what they believe was taken from them. Daniel looked between them all, clearly overwhelmed and confused by the direction the conversation had taken. I don't understand any of this. Stolen power? Old blood? What are you all talking about? Cale studied him for a long moment before answering, his expression calculating. It is not necessary for you to understand the full truth. What matters is whether you were a willing participant in whatever scheme Vivian's mother has been orchestrating, or simply an unwitting pawn. I swear I had no idea about any of this, Daniel said, desperation creeping into his voice. I know I hurt Elena terribly, and I will regret the way I handled things for the rest of my life. But I never intended to be part of some larger plot against her. I genuinely believed my feelings for Vivian were real, uncomplicated by anything beyond simple attraction. Elena studied his face carefully, searching for deception, and finding, to her surprise, what appeared to be genuine confusion and regret. Whatever cruelty he had shown her on her wedding day, she found herself believing that Daniel himself had likely been manipulated as thoroughly as Vivian had been, both of them unknowing pieces moved into position by someone far more calculating than either of them realized. I believe them, Elena said quietly, turning to Cale. I don't think either of them fully understood what they were being used for. Cale studied her for a moment, weighing her judgment, before nodding slowly. Very well, but this changes nothing regarding the danger their unwitting involvement has brought to our doorstep. If Vivian's mother sent them here today, even indirectly, it likely means she already suspects Elena's location, and possibly her connection to the old bloodline as well. What do we do now? Elena asked. We increase security immediately, Cale said, his mind clearly already working through strategic considerations. And we begin preparing for the possibility that Corinne, or whoever she answers to, may attempt more direct action in the near future. Vivian, still visibly shaken by the revelations of the afternoon, stepped forward hesitantly. I want to help, if I can. Whatever my mother is planning, I don't want to be part of it, not knowingly, not after everything you've just told me. Elena studied her cousin for a long moment, remembering years of complicated family history between them, rivalry and resentment tangled together with genuine, if imperfect, affection. Despite everything that had happened, despite the pain Vivian's actions had caused her, Elena found herself willing to extend a measure of trust, cautious but genuine. If you're willing to tell us everything you know about your mother's activities, her associates, anything that might help us understand what she's planning, it would be valuable, Elena said. But I need you to be completely honest, Vivian. No more secrets, no more half-truths. I promise, Vivian said, and for the first time since her arrival, her voice carried genuine sincerity rather than defensive bravado. Over the following hours, Vivian and Daniel provided as much detail as they could recall about Corinne's activities, her frequent unexplained absences, her occasional cryptic phone calls conducted in hushed, urgent tones, her seemingly casual but persistent questions about Elena's family history stretching back years before the wedding had even been planned. Ren took careful notes throughout, cross-referencing details against the historical records she had already gathered, slowly assembling a clearer picture of the danger that had been quietly building around Elena for far longer than anyone had previously realized. As evening fell over the estate, Cale called together his most trusted advisors, including Marin, to discuss the implications of everything that had been revealed. Elena sat in on the meeting, insisting on her right to understand every aspect of the threat now facing her, and found herself, for the first time since arriving at the estate, treated not as a fragile outsider requiring protection from difficult truths, but as an equal participant in decisions that would shape her own safety and future. Corinne's family has waited generations for an opportunity like this, Marin said grimly, studying the assembled notes spread across the table. If she believes Elena's old blood has finally surfaced within a living descendant, she will not simply walk away quietly. We must assume she will act, and likely sooner rather than later. Then we prepare accordingly, Cale said, his tone carrying the calm, steady authority Elena had come to recognize as central to his leadership. Increased patrols along the estate borders, careful monitoring of any unfamiliar activity in the surrounding region. And Elena, he added, turning to look at her directly, it is time we began your training in earnest, regardless of whether your old blood has fully awakened yet. You need to be prepared, both to defend yourself and to understand whatever abilities may eventually emerge within you. Elena nodded, feeling a fierce determination settle over her, replacing the lingering fear that had shadowed her since the confrontation with Daniel and Vivian earlier that day. I'm ready, she said, whatever it takes. Cale studied her for a long moment, something like pride flickering behind his pale gray eyes. Then we begin tomorrow. Outside the study windows, darkness had fully settled over the estate grounds, the forest beyond the walls silent and watchful, hiding whatever dangers might already be moving quietly through the shadows, drawing steadily closer with each passing day. The training began at dawn the following morning, in a wide clearing tucked deep within the estate's private forest, far enough from the main house that the sounds of practice would not disturb the household. Cale met Elena there himself, dressed simply in dark clothing, meant for movement rather than formality, his usual composed demeanor, replaced by something more focused and intent. We will start with the basics, he said, as Elena approached across the dew-soaked grass. Balance, awareness, control over your own body and breath. If your old blood ever awakens, these foundations will help you manage whatever changes come with it. The weeks that followed pushed Elena further than she had ever imagined herself capable of going, both physically and mentally. Cale proved a patient but demanding teacher, correcting her stance with gentle precision, teaching her to read subtle shifts in her surroundings, to sense danger before it fully revealed itself. Elena found herself growing stronger, sharper, more attuned to her own body and instincts than she had ever been during her ordinary human life before the wedding, that changed everything. Word arrived nearly 3 weeks into her training that Corinne's activities had escalated. Unfamiliar figures spotted scouting the outer edges of the estate's territory, their presence brief and cautious but unmistakably deliberate. Cale doubled the estate's security in response, stationing additional guards along the forest borders and instructing every pack member to remain vigilant for signs of intrusion. They're testing our defenses, Cale explained one evening, as he and Elena reviewed reports from the day's patrols. Looking for weaknesses, gathering information, before committing to any direct action. How much time do you think we have? Elena asked. Difficult to say, Cale admitted. Corinne has waited generations for this opportunity. She will not act recklessly. But she also will not wait indefinitely, now that she knows we are aware of her interest. Elena's training intensified as the weeks continued, Cale introducing increasingly complex exercises designed to prepare her for whatever confrontation might eventually come. She learned to move silently through the forest, to read tracks and signs left by others passing through the territory, to defend herself, using techniques that drew on both human discipline and the careful instincts Cale hoped might eventually connect her to her dormant heritage. It was during one such training session, nearly 2 months after Daniel and Vivian's unexpected visit, that everything changed. Elena had been sparring with Cale in the clearing, practicing defensive movements meant to help her escape a larger opponent's grasp, when a sharp, piercing pain suddenly lanced through her chest, stealing the breath from her lungs entirely. She stumbled, gasping, as Cale immediately moved to steady her, his expression shifting instantly from focused instruction to sharp concern. "Elena, what's wrong?" "I don't know," she managed, her voice strained. "Something feels different." "Wrong. Almost, but not exactly wrong. I can't explain it." Before Kale could respond, a low growl rumbled from somewhere behind them, and both turned sharply to see three unfamiliar figures emerging from the tree line at the edge of the clearing, their postures tense and predatory. Elena recognized instinctively, though she could not have explained how, that these were not ordinary humans, but members of a rival pack, their true nature evident in the coiled, dangerous energy radiating from their approach. "Corinne sends her regards," the lead figure said, a tall man with cold, calculating eyes fixed intently on Elena. "She has waited a long time for this moment." Kale moved instantly, placing himself between Elena and the approaching threat, his own posture shifting into something more dangerous, more alert. "You are trespassing on my territory," he said, his voice carrying a low, warning edge. "Leave now, or face the consequences of that choice." The lead intruder smiled coldly. "We didn't come to negotiate, King Draven. We came for what belongs to us." The confrontation erupted with sudden, violent speed, the three intruders shifting into their wolf forms in a blur of motion, their sleek, dark-furred bodies moving with predatory grace as they closed the distance toward Elena and Kale. Kale shifted as well, his massive charcoal form meeting the first attacker head-on, powerful jaws and claws clashing in a whirlwind of fur and motion that sent Elena stumbling backward in shock and fear. The sharp pain in her chest intensified suddenly, spreading outward through her entire body, and Elena felt something shift within her, something ancient and long dormant finally beginning to stir awake after generations of quiet sleep. Her vision sharpened, colors and shapes suddenly crisper, more vivid than she had ever experienced before. Her heartbeat slowed and steadied, adrenaline replaced by something calmer, more focused, more instinctive. One of the remaining attackers turned toward her, sensing an easier target than the king currently locked in fierce combat with his companion. Elena felt fear rise within her, sharp and immediate. But beneath it, something else emerged, something fierce and protective, and utterly unwilling to simply stand by and be taken. The wolf lunged toward her, jaws snapping, and Elena felt her body respond in ways she could not fully comprehend, muscles and bones shifting with a speed and intensity that mirrored what she had witnessed Kale do weeks before. Pain and transformation blurred together in a dizzying rush, and when her vision cleared moments later, Elena found herself standing on four powerful legs, her body covered in a coat of deep auburn fur, her senses alive with information she had never before been able to perceive. The attacking wolf hesitated, clearly startled by the sudden, unexpected transformation, giving Elena the crucial moment she needed to react. Instinct guided her movements more than conscious thought, her powerful new form allowing her to sidestep the attacker's renewed lunge and counter with a decisive strike of her own, driving the intruder backward with far more strength than she would have believed herself capable of possessing. Kale, having finally overwhelmed his own opponent, turned in time to witness Elena's transformation, his pale eyes widening with a mixture of shock and fierce pride even in the midst of ongoing danger. The third intruder, seeing his companions overwhelmed and the unexpected revelation of Elena's awakened power, made a swift, calculated decision to retreat, vanishing back into the tree line with his surviving companion close behind. The clearing fell into sudden, tense silence, broken only by the ragged sound of Elena's own breathing as she slowly shifted back into her human form, her body trembling with the aftermath of both the fight and the overwhelming transformation she had just experienced for the first time. Kale reached her in 3 swift strides, shifting back to human form himself and immediately wrapping his arms around her trembling frame, steadying her as her legs threatened to give out beneath the weight of everything that had just happened. "You transformed," he said, wonder and relief mingling in his voice. "Elena, your old blood, it has awakened." "I don't understand what just happened," Elena said, her voice shaking as she clung to him for support. "One moment, I was terrified, and the next, I was something else entirely." "You protected yourself," Kale said gently, holding her steady. "Your instincts recognized the danger and responded exactly as they needed to. This is the beginning of something extraordinary, Elena, though I understand how overwhelming it must feel right now." Elena looked up at him, her heart still pounding from the intensity of everything that had just transpired, and felt a fierce, unexpected surge of gratitude that he had been there beside her through it all. "They'll come back," she said quietly. "Won't they? Now that Corinne knows my old blood has fully awakened." "Almost certainly," Cale admitted. "But you are no longer defenseless, Elena. Whatever comes next, you will face it with strength you did not know you possessed, and you will not face it alone." Elena nodded slowly, drawing strength from his steady presence, from the fierce new power she could feel simmering just beneath her skin, waiting to be called upon again if needed. Whatever battles lay ahead, she understood now that she was no longer simply the woman who had been abandoned at her own wedding, helpless and humiliated. She had become something entirely new, something powerful and unexpected, forged in the fire of loss and betrayal into a strength she was only beginning to understand. As they made their way back toward the estate, the forest around them settling back into quiet stillness, Elena felt the first fragile threads of true confidence beginning to weave themselves into the fabric of her new identity, alongside the growing, undeniable warmth she felt whenever Cale stood beside her, steady and unwavering, exactly as he had promised he would be. News of the attack spread quickly through the estate, and by the following morning, Cale had assembled his full council to discuss the implications of what had happened in the clearing. Elena sat among them this time, no longer an outsider observing from the edges of important conversations, but a full participant whose voice carried weight equal to any pack member present. "Corinne knows now, without doubt, that Elena's old blood has awakened," Marin said grimly, her earlier suspicion of Elena entirely replaced by something closer to respect, after witnessing the reports of her transformation and successful defense against a trained attacker. She will not simply accept this defeat quietly. If anything, this confirms exactly what she has been seeking, and will only intensify her determination to act. "Then we need to consider our options carefully," Cale said. "We could remain here, strengthen our defenses further, and prepare to weather whatever assault Corinne eventually launches against this estate. Or we could take a more direct approach, seeking her out before she has the opportunity to gather greater strength and resources for an attack of her own." "What does direct action look like?" Elena asked. "A formal challenge," Ren explained, "presented according to old traditions long observed among pack leadership. If Corinne's claim to old blood power is genuine, and her grievance legitimate, she would be entitled to present her case openly, before witnesses from multiple packs, rather than pursuing violence and subterfuge in the shadows." "And if she refuses?" Elena asked. "Refusing such a challenge, when formally presented before the wider pack community, would brand her actions as illegitimate," Cale said. "It would strip away whatever justification she has used to rally support for her cause, and it would allow us to act more freely in defending against any further aggression, with the full backing of pack law and tradition behind us." The council debated the merits of this approach for several hours, weighing risks and benefits, until finally reaching consensus that a formal challenge, presented through proper channels, offered the best path forward, one that might resolve the growing conflict without further violence, while also exposing Corinne's true motives before witnesses who could hold her accountable. The challenge was formally issued 3 days later, delivered through proper channels to Corinne's household, inviting her to present her grievance openly, before an assembly of pack leaders gathered specifically for the purpose of hearing and adjudicating the dispute. Elena spent those 3 days continuing her training with renewed intensity, growing more comfortable with her transformed state, learning to call upon it more deliberately rather than relying solely on instinctive reaction under threat. The day of the gathering arrived cold and clear, the assembly held in a neutral location, deep within a forest, considered sacred ground among the region's pack communities, where old traditions of fair hearing and honest dispute resolution had been observed for centuries. Elena stood beside Cale, as representatives from a dozen different packs gathered in a wide circle, their expressions curious and watchful, as they waited to hear the details of a conflict that had, until recently, remained hidden from wider pack awareness. Corinne arrived precisely as the gathering was set to begin, flanked by several members of her own household, her expression carrying a mixture of defiance and barely concealed anxiety at finding herself suddenly exposed before such a significant audience. "State your grievance," the elder, presiding over the assembly, instructed, her voice carrying clearly across the gathered crowd. Corinne stepped forward, her chin lifted with practiced confidence, though Elena could sense the underlying uncertainty beneath her composed exterior. Generations ago, my family's claim to old blood power was stolen through violence and betrayal, our ancestors scattered and silenced by those who feared our strength. I have sought only to reclaim what was rightfully ours, power that has now resurfaced within a bloodline my family has watched and waited for across many years. And your method for reclaiming this power? The elder asked. Manipulation, deception, and armed intrusion onto another pack's protected territory? Corinne's confidence wavered slightly under the pointed question. I did what was necessary, given the circumstances. Necessary? Cale repeated, stepping forward to address the assembly directly. You orchestrated the manipulation of two innocent humans, using their emotions and relationships as tools to isolate and expose Elena to danger. When that failed, you sent armed intruders onto my protected territory, intending violence against a woman who had done nothing beyond simply existing as the inheritor of a bloodline you believe was wrongfully taken from your family generations ago. That is not justice, Corinne. That is aggression, dressed in the language of old grievance. Murmurs moved through the assembled crowd, several pack leaders exchanging troubled glances as they weighed the details being presented before them. Elena watched Corinne's expression shift, defiance giving way slowly to something more desperate, as she realized the assembly's sympathy was not tilting in her favor. The old blood belongs to those strong enough to claim it, Corinne said, her voice rising with barely controlled frustration. History has always favored strength over sentiment. My family was wronged, and I will not simply stand aside and watch that wrong go unaddressed. Then perhaps, Elena said, stepping forward to stand beside Cale, drawing every eye in the assembly toward her. You should have sought a different path than violence and manipulation. I did not ask for this power. I did not even know it existed within me until the moment your allies attacked me in the forest, forcing me to defend myself. If your grievance is truly about justice, then justice should be sought through honest means, not through cruelty inflicted on people who never wronged you personally. The assembly fell silent, weighing her words carefully. The elder presiding over the gathering studied Elena for a long moment before turning back to Corinne. The claims presented here paint a clear picture of aggression rather than legitimate grievance. This assembly does not recognize your right to pursue Elena Marsh, now Elena Draven, through any means beyond peaceful and lawful negotiation. Any further action taken against her or her household will be considered a violation of pack law, subject to the full consequences such violations carry. Corinne's face went pale with the weight of this judgment, her earlier confidence collapsing entirely under the assembly's clear rebuke. She looked as though she might argue further, but the expressions of the surrounding pack leaders, unified in their disapproval, seemed to convince her that further protest would only worsen her already damaged standing. This is not finished, Corinne said finally, though the words carried far less threat than she likely intended, weakened by the obvious defeat she had just suffered, before witnesses whose opinions mattered greatly to her family's continued standing within the wider pack community. It is finished, Cale said firmly. For your own sake, I would advise you to accept this judgment and move forward without further attempts at aggression. My household and my wife are protected now not only by my own strength, but by the recognition of every pack represented in this assembly today. Corinne retreated with her household soon after, her earlier bravado thoroughly deflated by the public nature of her defeat. As the assembly began to disperse, various pack leaders approaching Cale and Elena to offer their respects and acknowledge the resolution of the conflict, Elena felt a profound sense of relief wash over her, the fear and uncertainty that had shadowed her for months finally beginning to lift. That evening, back within the familiar walls of their estate, Cale found Elena standing on the balcony outside their bedroom, looking out over the moonlit forest with an expression of quiet contemplation. You did something remarkable today, he said, joining her at the railing. Standing before that assembly, speaking with such clarity and conviction, I do not think Corinne expected to face such strength from you. I surprised myself, honestly, Elena admitted, smiling faintly. A few months ago, I was standing at an altar, abandoned and humiliated, convinced my life had fallen apart completely. Now here I am, apparently capable of turning into a wolf and standing up to power-hungry rivals in front of an assembly of pack leaders. Life has a strange way of leading us, exactly where we are meant to be, Kale said, even when the path there is unexpected or painful. Elena turned to look at him, studying the quiet warmth in his pale gray eyes, the steady, unwavering presence that had carried her through every impossible moment since the day her wedding had shattered into something entirely unforeseen. I never thought I would say this, given how it all began, but I'm grateful for everything that happened that day, even the pain of it, because it led me here, to you, to this life I never could have imagined for myself. I feel the same, Kale said softly, reaching out to take her hand gently in his own. I did not know, when I walked into that chapel, that I would find someone who would come to mean as much to me as you have. I only knew, in that moment, that I could not let you face such cruelty alone. Elena felt her heart swell with a warmth that had grown steadily over the months they had spent together, no longer the cautious, guarded feeling of two strangers bound together by unusual circumstance, but something deeper, more genuine, built through shared trials and honest trust. Kale, she said quietly, I think I'm ready to say something I haven't said before. He turned to face her fully, waiting patiently, giving her the space to find her words in her own time, exactly as he always had. I love you, Elena said, the words coming easily, naturally, carrying none of the uncertainty that had once made trust feel impossible, not because of the wedding, or the danger, or the strange, extraordinary world you introduced me to, simply because of who you are, and who I've become, standing beside you. Kale's expression softened into something Elena had never seen from him before, unguarded and openly emotional, the careful composure of the king giving way entirely to the honest feeling of the man beneath it. I love you too, Elena, he said, drawing her gently into his arms. More than I ever believed myself capable of loving anyone. Beneath the quiet light of the moon, standing together on the balcony, overlooking the forest that had witnessed so much of their unlikely story unfold, Elena felt, for the first time since that terrible morning at the altar, that she had finally found exactly where she was meant to be. Not through the plans she had carefully built and lost in a single devastating moment, but through the unexpected courage of a stranger who had refused to let her stand alone, and through her own unyielding strength, awakened in the fire of hardship into something she never could have imagined she would become. The wedding that never happened had led her, against every reasonable expectation, to the life she had truly been meant to live all along.